Welcome to today's event, a webinar on peace education, challenges and opportunities. This webinar is organized jointly by Collegium Civitas University from Warsaw, Poland, and our esteemed partners from United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITAR. My name is Katarzyna Maniszewska, and at Collegium Civitas, I'm the Vice-Rector for International Relations, and I will have the privilege and a great pleasure to be the moderator of today's seminar. We are meeting here today with our partners from UNITAR, first because we want to discuss the topics of challenges and opportunities of peace education, take a closer look on how they are aligned with SDG 16, and our partners from UNITAR will talk about that in detail. But as a short opening, if you allow me, I would like to say a few words about this partnership between UNITAR and Collegium Civitas. We are really proud of this partnership, and we value this cooperation a lot. As a result of this cooperation, not only short-term programs and events such as today's webinar are held, but foremostly, we have both our institutions have designed jointly a master's degree program in strategic peace and conflict studies. And this really is a great honor for me to have today two people who are actually behind this program, who are the heads of this program, who co-authored this absolutely state-of-the-art master's degree program, unique in Poland, that for sure, and one of very few in whole Europe. And that is Ms. Katarzyna A. Przybyła, esteemed colleague of mine, lecturer at Collegium Civitas, expert in peace and conflict studies, and I think I may say also a good friend, and Dr. Jon-Hans Coetzer from UNITAR, who, apart from being the co-head and co-author of the program, is the team leader of the online learning and education unit at the Division for Peace at UNITAR. And they both agreed to meet us today and speak to us today. But we also have two other speakers for today's webinar. And let me also welcome cordially our colleague from UNITAR, Catherine White, who is one of the leading experts worldwide on gender issues. And she is a gender advisor at Division for Peace at UNITAR. Also, we will be joined by one of Poland's top experts on international conflicts and lecturer at our university, Collegium Civitas, Mr. Maciej Bużański. Mr. Bużański will join us in a couple of minutes. First, our first speaker is Katarzyna A. Przybyła. Katarzyna, who is heading the Strategic Peace and Conflict Studies at Collegium Civitas, is an expert, an editor, analyst, policy analyst here in Poland. Her very extensive professional experience includes also the work at the National Security Bureau here in Poland, but she also, for instance, conducted field research and cooperated with human rights organizations in Israel and Palestine. So she knows not only the theory, but also the praxis of peace building. And I think she's the best person to speak to us about the teaching about peace. So Katarzyna, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm thrilled that I can be here with excellent guests. And I'm thrilled that we can have this webinar on peace education. Let me share a short presentation with you, because I'll be using a presentation. Not extremely sophisticated, so do not worry about that. I hope that you can see it. Yes.
Yes, it is visible.
Perfect. So I'm talking and teaching about peace. When I was thinking about how to talk about talking and teaching about peace, I felt that when there's something new to some of the people in the audience, it's good to compare it to something that we all know. And I thought about the Harry Potter books. I hope that you know the books. If not, these are the books about a boy who discovers that he's a wizard, and he gets a letter to Hogwarts, the School of Magic. So many people from around the world wanted to get such a letter after reading this book, a letter to Hogwarts, to the School of Magic. Definitely there was a mystery there. Definitely there was something magical about getting a letter to Hogwarts. You can sense what it's about, but you have lots of questions. How it's going to be, what kind of expectations, experiences you will get there. And when this mystery people were curious, but also excited about it. So when people are asking me how it is to talk and teach about peace, I think about Hogwarts and I think about Dumbledore. Why? Because when I came back to Poland after 2 years at Krakow Institute for International Peace Studies, and as Katarzyna mentioned, when I created the program, it was the first such program in Poland. So nothing similar before, nothing similar three years ago. So when I came back, I felt exactly like Dumbledore, so the head of the magic school, talking to a muggle, so a non-magic person. What are you talking about? These were the reactions. You can actually study peace. So what do you do there? Do you sit on the floor in a circle? Do you sing songs and you smoke weed? That was the first question usually. And then when I was talking to my colleagues and I was saying, you know, I teach peace, and I was really proud of it, they were saying, you teach what? So the reactions were like that. And what is the conclusion after these reactions? You can say that one can say that there is a problem with peace education and that there is a problem with talking about peace. I say differently. I think that we do not have a problem with peace education. We have a problem with the lack of it. And that we do not have a problem when talking about peace, but we do not. The problem is that we do not talk about peace. So what are the challenges? When you start, you know, this is your starting point. Lots of misunderstandings, lack of knowledge. So what are the challenges when you're teaching and in general when you're talking about peace? So I see two main challenges when I'm both teaching and talking about peace. The first challenge is that there is this lack of understanding what peace is, what it means, and that there are lots of misconceptions around that. That's the first main challenge. The second, that's the lack of courage to talk about peace, especially at the policy high level. So let me now talk about both challenges and what they mean in details. So first, misconceptions. What is the first misconception? Well, that peace is something soft, that peace is something weak, that it's nice, nice to have, but it's not necessarily serious. So when I hear, such voices, I usually encourage people to talk to people from, let's say, Syria. Just, a reminder, 400,000 people died in a civil war. To talk to people from Palestine, Colombia, Myanmar, Somalia, Belarus, to people at risk because there is the lack of peace in their countries, and ask them, do they feel that it's not important? Or do they feel that peace is not serious enough? So that's the first misconception. The second misconception is that peace means just the lack of war. just the lack of direct violence. So people are saying, we do not have war in our country, so we don't have to focus on peace because we already have it. We don't need people responsible for building peace in our country. So how do we see it in our field is that it's just half of the truth. We use terms positive and negative peace in the field of peace and conflict studies. So what it means, negative doesn't mean something bad, that it's the worst kind of peace. Negative means just the absence of something. So negative peace is the absence of direct violence. People are not fighting. No war. So definitely nice, especially if you have experienced war in the past, but it's not enough. And let me give you a few examples from the countries I mentioned. Think about Syria. Imagine that different parties stop fighting in Syria. There is a ceasefire. Definitely something, we really want. But can children go to school? Can people go to the hospitals? In many cases, they cannot. Why? Because hospitals and schools were destroyed during the war. So now think about Belarus. No war there. No direct conflict. Can people protest without consequences? What about the freedom of expression? What about freedom of press? And now Poland. We are the lucky ones without a war for almost 70 years. But do you feel safe when you have to wait a year for a surgery, or you have to wait a few months before you can get to the doctor? Do all people have equal rights? And positive peace is all about that. It's about human rights, it's about freedom of expression, it's about freedom of press. It's also about being able to go to the doctor and being able to go to the school and study at the university. It's about feeling safe. And here we go to the second challenge. So that was the first challenge. Misconceptions, misunderstandings, lack of understanding of what peace is, what it means. Now the second challenge, the lack of courage. Now I'm accusing politicians, so I should be warned. So when you know that peace building covers it all, that peace building covers understanding the root causes of violence, solving and transforming conflicts, building societies, protecting human rights, you can say that politicians should be working on it, should be interested in that, and should talk about it. But when you take a closer look, well, it doesn't look so nice. I know that we have people from different countries in the audience listening to us. So I have a short exercise for you. Take your notebook, or you can use your computer, take a pen or pencil and write down the answers to the 3 simple questions. So first one, when you listen to your politicians, I don't know, president, ministers, secretaries of state, when they're talking about the future of your country, your future, how often do they use the word peace in their speeches? And if you want to dig deeper into the topic, try to compare how often they use security and how often they use peace. That's the first question. Now, if you're really interested, check strategic documents. These are the documents that your governments are preparing with the vision of the future of your country. So the priorities of your governments. Then, we have our computers, so it's very easy to check how many times they use the word peace in such strategic documents. Believe me, you will be surprised. And then check the names of the policy positions in your government. So the name of ministries, what Secretary of States, Undersecretary of States do you have, representatives, and do you see the word peace in the names of the positions? Do you have representatives in your countries that are responsible for building peace? Or maybe they're responsible for peace education? If your answer is no, or not so many, you're not alone. Of course, there are countries where situation is better, and there are countries where situation is worse. But in general, the problem exists. People do not talk about peace, do not talk about peace education. They don't even know what it means, and they are afraid. So why the policy level is so skeptical about that? Why politicians are afraid to use the word peace? Well, I'm afraid that they are afraid to use the word, that they prefer to use the word security because it sounds stronger. And peace does not for many people. And moreover, they are afraid to talk about it because they are afraid that they would be compared to the candidates during the beauty contest, like the Miss Universe. Because who is talking about the world peace in a jokes? Candidates in a beauty contest, not the politicians. So these are very harmful stereotypes, but these are also the reasons why sometimes politicians do not use the word peace and do not talk about it at all. And it always makes me smile when I, see this fear of the word peace. Because as you probably know, and this is a cliche, that it's much easier to destroy than to rebuild. And peace is about rebuilding. So what it means, that this is the hardest job ever. And it's just, silly to think that it can be considered weak or soft. Now, these are the challenges. Probably there are much more. The two that I mentioned are that are really important. Now, what can we do? Because, we need a call for action if we know what the problem is. We created strategic peace and conflict studies in Warsaw with cooperation with UNITAR, and we welcome students from around the world to join us. But peace education is not just about, university teaching and learning. You can say that this is just the beginning. So what we can do, what you can do, the participant of this webinar, I have 3 suggestions what can be done. So the first one is disenchant the word peace. If this is, if it's so magical, if there's a mystery behind that, okay, make a good use of this mystery, but disenchant the word peace. Talk with your family, with your friends about it. Ask them what it means to them. Go deeper into the topic. Try to figure out what are the different concepts, what people in different parts of the world are thinking about it. That's your role. This is what you can do. Second, push your governments to focus on peace, and that's doable. Do you know the saying, if you want peace, prepare yourself for war? The worst phrase ever. I have a better one, but it's a longer one, so probably that's the problem with my own. If you want peace, you first have to learn what it is, then you have to build it, and then you have to work on it every single day. Because I feel that we've been focusing and we've spent so much time preparing for war that we have forgotten how to build peace. And then the third suggestion, what you can do, make change in your own community at the grassroots level. Maybe you're not able to, change the policy in your country at the beginning, but you can make changes in your smaller community. You can start from the grassroots level to make changes. You can organize meetings. You can talk to people, because we do deserve to have peace education. And we all can be peace builders. No matter if if you're a taxi driver and if you own a business, you don't have to have a peace builder in the name of your position. That's a state of mind. And as I mentioned, peace building, that's the hardest and that's the toughest job, but it's also the most rewarding one. And my colleagues will tell you how hard it is to work on peace, but also what fun it is to work on peace. So thank you very much. If you want to reach out to me, here's my email address. And I look forward to listening to the second presenter.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation and excellent insight also into what topics will be present in the curriculum of the Strategic Peace and Conflict Studies. And by the way, dear participants, dear guests, the admissions to our program are open, so apply and enroll if you are interested in learning more. And now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Jon-Hans Coetzer, who, again, just let me introduce him, is the team leader of the Online Learning and Education Unit Division for Peace at UNITAR. And as I already mentioned, but I want to say it again, he co-created this our joint program. So he's here in the double role, let's say, also as co-author of the curriculum for Strategic Peace and Conflict Studies. Dr. Coetzer at UNITAR, Division for Peace, creates a high-value partnerships with different learning and educational institutions, focusing on areas of peace, of course, but also security and justice. He has more than 25 years of experience in both higher education and vocational training in more than 22 countries. Jon-Hans, this is a pleasure and a privilege to have you here with us today. And please, the floor is yours. Please, if you could switch on your microphone because it's obvious. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Katarzyna. And also let me, on behalf of the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, thank you and the colleagues from Collegium, Civitas, for embracing this opportunity and for us to work together in co-creating this master's program. Let me first and foremost then directly address our participants and to say thank you so much for taking time this afternoon and to listen to what we would like to share with you. And I would like to really start this conversation by saying to you that I was listening carefully to what Katarzyna, the co-program director, was saying to you about the challenges of working with peace and creating peace. And I could not help myself but to reflect on, I have worked in 27 different active conflicts and how legally enshrined in international law that countries can indeed make use of war to defend itself, its interest, but how do we negotiate to reduce the impact when we do go into a situation of conflict? And what I would like to do in our session today is focus on the essential partnership that is required if we want to start looking at conflict and peace building processes, because really at the heart is the Sustainable Development Goals, and specifically Goal 16, which is all about building peaceful, just, and inclusive societies to accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, which has tangible benefits for all levels of society. Now, there indeed has been a tendency among some development actors and practitioners operating in very difficult, crisis-affected and fragile contexts and situations to consider that the sustainable developments are not for countries affected by crisis or fragility, at least not until the crisis in question is over. But governments and citizens in these very countries that find themselves in these very difficult situations are stating precisely the opposite, that the Agenda 2030 is of paramount importance for them and has to be implemented in their countries as soon as possible. So there is that level of, we can't have these entertaining discussions. There is, and COVID, ladies and gentlemen, global warming has accelerated the urgency for us to really start developing these crucial partnerships, because a government leader from a country affected by crisis and fragility recently made his case very clear. And I quote, he said, "We cannot afford to waste any time to embrace the new global development agenda and ensure national resilient systems are built quickly to achieve. And peace is one of those fundamental elements that's at the heart of the SDGs. Now, to focus on building resilient systems and tailoring the SDGs to the context-specific challenges faced in situations of crisis and fragility underpins the support that countries and people and fragile situations are requesting. Now, if we look at crises and we quickly do a DNA analysis, we know that crises are multidimensional, it is deadly, and it is very costly. So development and humanitarian needs are growing faster and it lasts longer. And we must rethink and sharpen our approach and solutions and tools in partnership with local communities, where we tap into indigenous knowledge, indigenous know-how, and it's not just a question that is sitting with politicians. The cross-spectrum of society needs to participate so that we can ensure no one is left behind in these initiatives to bring about peaceful and lasting. And let me just conclude by saying that some more compelling evidence, as cited in various UN reports, that if we craft these targeted development solutions together, if we coherently mobilize national and international support in addressing these critical development challenges in fragile situations, we can overcome fragility and extreme poverty and those vulnerability traps, which is currently trapping at least 1.5 billion of our brothers and sisters. The growing evidence of the link between peaceful societies and the responsive institutions and sustainable development was the impetus for the creation of Goal 16 in the 2030 Agenda. But more importantly, the adoption of Goal 16 by member states is a clear recognition of the importance of a government-informed approach to sustainable development and building peaceful societies. That recognition that governments is part and parcel of sustainable development, such as, and I mentioned another important UN document, making progress on the SDGs by building peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. Now, as Katarzyna was saying, how do we start? And allow me to throw a challenge out to you and to say, the title of this program is indeed Strategic Peace and Conflict Studies. And how do we contribute? How do we become architects? How do we become contributors to create a deeper understanding of how to first sustain peace, including making meaningful political settlements as part of these increasing and important dialogues? How do we address the legacy of conflict to ensure that we, a community or a society, don't relapse into conflict? How do we encourage and strengthen national and local leadership across the spectrum of the age division and the gender aspect? And I am very happy to have our dear colleague, Catherine White, who is specifically going to speak about the issue of gender. And then the last 2 points, to facilitate the creation and the institutionalization of public dialogues and discourses that builds on consensus for positive change. War was a solution that was valid in the past. Now, the cost and the lasting effects is simply not a solution, ladies and gentlemen. And I think my colleague Katarzyna made that very, very clear in her presentation. And finally, is for us then to design new ways of strengthening core government and societal functions with a full reach to make sure that we can build peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. And I really want to conclude by saying, are you ready to take up that challenge? Thank you very much. And as well, I will, should you wish to be in contact, I will also share my, my email in the chat box. But please, we invite you to post any questions that you may have for us in the chat box, and be happy to engage with you and try to answer your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jon-Hans. Thank you for this speech. I think it is clear for all of us that we really need also a new generation of leaders, a new generation of peace builders, peacemakers. And I really hope that we can, with our program, also make our contribution to the development of this process. Thank you also for emphasizing the role of gender in peace building. That's our next topic, and our next speaker is Catherine White, who is a gender expert, as already mentioned, and gender advisor for the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. She holds extensive experience of working on gender equality and gender mainstreaming, and is responsible for developing and implementing a gender perspective and gender equality programming across all projects and activities of UNITAR's Division for Peace. Catherine, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you here with us today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Katarzyna, and also thank you, Jon-Hans and Katarzyna. What a panel to be sitting on. I've so enjoyed these first two presentations and really can't wait to hear more. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Catherine White, and I'm so delighted to be joining you today to discuss peace education and the challenges and opportunities. And of course, you've heard from my profile that I am gender mad, so I'll be speaking with you in particular about gender in peace building. And what I really hope to do is to provide you, I suppose, just a little snapshot of the various lenses through which you can take gender and apply it and really look at these quite complex and alive concepts of peace building and of sustainable peace. And I kind of want to put the two together, gender and peace building. Why are they relevant and why does this matter? So that is my first question to you all that I want you to just already start thinking about. What is the link between gender and peace building? Why is this important? And I'll give you a little background. So for me, gender equality is an essential marker of, firstly, of inclusive peace building. And inclusive peace building is important because it is essential for sustainable peace. And when we speak about peace, we need to speak about a peace that will be lasting. And there cannot be a sustainable peace without gender equality. So that's the first thing I want to already have us thinking about. The second thing that I just want to really flag before I go any further is that when I refer to gender, I don't just mean women. I also don't just mean women and men. I really refer to people of all genders. And I think it's important to just note that, because people with other gender identities are often left out of discussions of gender in the peace building and development world. And this can mean that their very specific vulnerabilities are ignored. It can mean that their needs are not met, and also that their contributions are overlooked. So I will already start from this really inclusive standpoint. So the first thing to consider, what is gender? It's a big question, and I have one word for you. If you take one thing from my little presentation today, gender is alive. It is not a static concept. It is a constantly ever-changing state. It's complex and it is alive. And the mistake that many of us make is not seeing gender in this way. And actually, Katarzyna, when you were making the Harry Potter reference, I was completely relating, because my master's at Oxford University, I studied women's studies. And I would often tell people, you know, oh, fantastic, you're at Oxford. What are you studying? Women's studies. Women's studies? What is there possibly to learn about women? And people didn't understand it. And the answer is actually, of course, that there is quite a lot to learn. So that is just a nice kind of connection we have. But moving on from that, if gender is alive and it's complex, then I want to invite you to think about how we can use that and use gender as a transformational way of understanding how we look at peace. So in the context of peace building, I think we can look at gender in three ways. There are many more, but I mean, I want to focus on these three today. So gender can be an analytical tool, gender can be an approach, and gender can also be a goal, something that we aspire to. So these aren't exclusive, they really work together. And as we think of gender in this transformative way, through these three contexts, I want you to think of it with having different elements that are attached to it. So firstly, an analytical tool. Well, gender analysis is something that's really important in considering how gender and peace building work together. And a gender analysis can really show us the experiences of people of different genders in both conflict phases and also in peace. So we use gender analysis to assess their needs and show how gender relations can change during and due to conflict and peace. So that's really important. And then as an approach, gender can actually encourage us to look at the peace building process itself. And these are really important questions. For example, who are the peacekeepers? Who are the peace negotiators? Who are the politicians and the formal leaders? Who are we seeing when we look at these key drivers of sustainable peace? So as an approach, gender actually encourages us to look at the distribution of power. Who has a voice in local and national decision-making processes? And that is really, really important, because what we need and what we're still only just seeing more of is women and sexual and gender minorities right at the heart of these processes. And they need to be there, because that's the only way that we can design a lasting peace that will be advantageous and empowering for people of all genders. So we need to have everyone at the heart of creating the peace that they want to see. So as an approach, gender can also look like making sure that we are being inclusive, including women, including sexual and gender minorities in all decision-making processes, and actually empowering them as decision makers and as actors in all areas of peace building. So as an approach, gender is expansive. It says to us, let's invite people in. And the third approach that I want to look at today, gender is a goal. What do I mean by a goal? I mean, the word suggests that it's something that we aspire to, that it's aspirational. And that is right, because achieving peace leads to greater gender equality, but simultaneously establishing gender equality leads to peace. It's really quite simple. The two work together and they can't really exist without each other. So I like those three ways of thinking about peace. how else can our understanding of gender be transformational? This is the word I really want us to keep coming back to. We want to think about it as an alive concept and move with it. So I've spoken a little bit about gender analysis, and that is now very well recognized in the peace building world as an essential part of all conflict analysis. However, I would like to suggest that it often doesn't go far enough, and that we still include gender perspectives in a very limited way. So, for example, a gender analysis can often look a little bit more like thinking about the specific impacts of conflict on women, very important, but it doesn't look at the wider relationships between gender and conflict. So we don't look enough at how gender norms can impact on conflict dynamics by being drivers of conflict. It's not just about impacts, it can also be a driver of conflict and insecurity. And I think we need to think about those things with a specific link to peace and conflict. So that would be one way I think we could be transformative. The second would be to address gender structures, gender norms. They're really not just attitudes and beliefs held by individuals. They're actually reproductions of social orders that are enshrined and ingrained, and they're perpetuated by political and economic and cultural and social frameworks. So we need to challenge gender norms. And again, I'm coming back to what my colleague said, because people often think, oh, but this doesn't apply. You know, I'm from the UK, we've got gender equality. Well, have we actually? We still buy pink clothes for our baby girls and blue clothes for our baby boys. And that is a most basic example of how gender norms are alive and they're thriving, and we need to actively think about them. Another way that gender is transformative is men and boys have to be considered as part of any gender perspective. And it isn't about thinking that they are the problem, is actually considering their attitudes and their behaviours as indispensable in expanding our understanding of conflict and insecurity. And we need to look at masculinities. Masculinities can be really harmful drivers of conflict. So men and boys have to be part of any peace building process. And we really need to kind of mainstream the perspectives of different genders in all of our international interventions. And finally, we have to advance the women, peace and security agenda. We really need to take it further, and we need to kind of bring all of these different things in. So in conclusion, how do we approach the topic of gender in peace building? My first thing, remember that it is alive. It is changing. What does that mean for you in your daily lives? Maybe you don't live in any sort of war zone, but perhaps you do live in a world where boys are taught to fight and girls are taught that they are inherently peaceful. So you can challenge that yourself. You can go further, you can do more, and you can actually be transformative. I'll leave it there for now. I will also drop my email in the chat, and I really welcome any questions and thoughts and can't wait to hear the remaining presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Well, we have, I think, some food for thoughts after your presentation. Thank you very much. I also hope there will be questions coming in. I already see that we have the first question from our participants. And dear participants, our apologies. We had a small technical glitch, and that is why for a few minutes the questions and the chat was disabled, but it is back on. So please share your comments and opinions. And now I would like to move on to our next speaker, and also my esteemed colleague from Collegium Civitas University, international conflict expert, a political scientist, and Mr. Marcin Bużański, who also, as all our panelists, has a very broad experience professional in security and peace building issues. Among other, he serves as director for international dialogue of the Warsaw Security Forum. He's an expert with a career with the United Nations in areas of political transition, conflict analysis, supporting peace process and mediation and post-conflict governance. So he's the best speaker, I would say, to talk to us today a little bit more about peace building and state building in practice. So Marcin, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and thank you to all my predecessors for really fascinating and I would say inspiring presentations. And I think everybody who joined this webinar is really lucky to learn from such an esteemed group about peace building, about state building, about peace studies overall. I want to pick up on 2 points made by the predecessors here. And firstly, Katarzyna was trying to explain the depth concept and behind generally the importance to build more of a weight to the word peace in terms of everyday political processes that we see around the world. In my even go one step further. I mean, we can, the politics around the world is in a way a result on how well peace is approached and defined. I mean, this is how we build relations between states, between communities, between different levels of actors worldwide. And if we're starting to redefine building those relations with an angle of understanding peace, this is one of the critical approaches for us as a building block, as a ground for actually how we redefine politics in a world that is changing so fast, so dramatically, with all the changes, with the digital revolution, with all the changes of COVID. There's a certain vacuum of understanding of how to approach the relations in politics in modern times. And for all the practitioners of peace studies and for generally attracting the concept of peace as a key political understanding or understanding of politics and relations, this is our time. So I can only second this argument, and really for all of those who joined us, you are in the right place and the right group to engage in this and at the right time. So an important point I wanted to make. Another point which one of my colleagues here has mentioned, talking about the importance of partnerships. Well, I want to deep dive a little bit into that from the element of practice, from the element of actually what has happening on the ground when you engage in peace building or supporting a peace process. I've been lucky to teach here at Collegium Civitas analysis, conflict analysis, and how international organizations function in crisis and conflict settings, and how they work to achieve those goals that we've talked about. And here, the SDG 16 is a great example how an approach was put together. Its predecessors that I've worked quite a lot on, so the peace building and state building goals, which have been a cry out from 27 countries, looking at the previous development framework, saying, that type of approach doesn't work. It has to be a completely different angle of understanding of political processes and conflict to achieve those results in peace building and in state building. And from the practice element, why the element of partnerships is so crucial? Well, it's actually taking a step further. It's an ongoing battle for achieving certain results, which always, I mean, you never can do it alone. You will always need to build certain relations and have understandings of others in order to have progress towards the goals you want to achieve. Now, what does that mean? It means that, the framework, the understanding of having partnerships is great. But actually, what you need to do is read what are the interests of all the parties involved, right? When you get engaged, you need to understand from the very, very lowest level, from the community level to the mid-level, to government levels, to international actors engagement level, you need to understand what are their goals, what are their objectives, what are their political interests, because without that, you will not form alliances. And what are alliances? Alliances are partnerships in order to build leverage in the game that we're playing here for peace to achieve those goals. So for that, for forming those partnerships, you need to have a good readout. understand the context, understand the environment, the players, the interests. What do donors want, the ones with the money? What do the ones with influence want? The ones with the guns that we need to talk with. There's a new wave of digital influencers that are coming up. There's our new roles, the new strengths of our civil society changing constantly. Now we need to learn as practitioners of peace to read this out well, to understand it, to work with this quickly and build those alliances, build those coalitions, really build those partnerships. And honestly, this hasn't been easy before. It was one of the areas where so-called, sorry, I don't like to use this, international community has been generally, unsuccessful. So this is one of the big changes and important things that need to happen. And from practitioners' point of view, you work on this on the ground all the time. I remember when we were, working in an incredibly interesting period just before the South Sudan, the referendum in South Sudan, the independence referendum, and creating really, the structure of a new government. And it was a constant dialogue process with the different donor countries, the mediator countries, the ones who are most involved, Switzerland, Norway, the US, the EU, all of the others. Who wants to engage on what level, with what? And then, working with all the different parties and all the different actors there to gain some kind of an agreement who might take which ministry, where some support will go. Well, if you will, get this package of funding, will you allow entrance of humanitarian assistance so we can stop these conflicts? This is an ongoing battle. If you form partnerships, you will be so much stronger in achieving that. And it worked quite well, until the referendum, but it was very difficult in that game. It was easier to sell the concept, build partnerships around the state building, so building the kind of government structure for the newly established state of South Sudan, but it was really hard to get the message through on the preventive side, meaning, problems won't disappear with independence, and you from Sudan, all right, so from the north, but basically the ones in terms of the conflict, the core conflict between the Dinka and Nuer tribe, the others, it will reemerge, and unfortunately it did. 2 or 3 years after the independence, the civil war came in. So it was. There was an awareness, and the bells of prevention were ringing, but we didn't have enough alliances. We didn't build strong enough partnerships to get the message through, to get the political war through. So this is something that you really need to work on. Another part, from the practice side, something that I put a lot of attention teaching in my class, and I think we really want to come out in this program. It's also, kind of not just the policy, not just the approach, but actually the inner working of the core actors. So when you become all practitioners of peace and work, with the United Nations, with the European Union, with OEC, with other regional organizations, that you actually, understand the practice of navigating those bodies, which are huge bureaucracies with different working types of alliances you need to build in them. My colleagues in UNITAR, I'm sure they'll appreciate what I'm saying now, but this is a skill and an art of its own in the inner politics and inner working of those organizations, of those institutions. And you need to be good at this to achieve your goals, to work towards your organizational aspirations and realization of plans that you have for your projects, for implementing the policies. So we try to also understand the different parts of organizations, how they collaborate together. These are huge bodies, like different agencies. When we were on the ground in Mogadishu, working in the peace process in Somalia, we were all in a compound. There were different interests. Everybody's fighting for money. Everybody's fighting, for the security detail to go for meetings. This is you need to build your alliances there. You need to build your partnerships there. Understand what the others need, right? When I was in charge of the political support program, working with the parliament and constitution making bodies, I would get the guys from UNICEF and the guys from UNHCR into my convoys, because the mission would pay for them, because they were program criticality once, so meaning on the political side, but then because they'd come with all us and get their sort of deals done, that allowed more access into other places, right? So I think this is important that, especially for people who want to study and engage in the field, that they understand this importance, and that they also are, have the skill set and pay attention to that type of practical engagement. So this is another big importance on partnerships. And I think, the final thing that I'll say, and then I'll stop and leave it for questions, on the side of building practice, one more thing that I like to add, and this is into our classes and our groups, it's not just how you implement the policy on the higher level, how you get that understanding and then build that practice on the ground, but also how you yourself build your career, your objective and your path into that level, right? So again, as my colleagues will tell you, those big international bodies working on this, they're not easy ones to engage with and actually build a path. And one of the reasons people are looking for employees who have that understanding of the inner workings of the bureaucracy, but also I think there's the system that they've been having on the ground to bring in new people. Many times, isn't geared up for today's realities. Also with remote work, with good ideas, with the whole digital sphere, with fast impact that you want to work in. And I think this is slowly changing and opening. There's a new opening to engagements also maybe with the private sector, with people with different background. So we also want to tap into those career paths so that people can more broadly see themselves while doing all different things, become those working with those organizations, become the peace builders, and have good ideas and get some of the skill set and experience from us who've been gone through those processes on how to go about it and how to do it. So this is something that I think through modern peace studies should also have sort of in their saddlebag, and we definitely want to have this in our program. I probably have taken too much time, so I will thank very, very much and leave it up to the question and answer session. Just one caveat, I might 5 minutes before need to leave here, but I'm open for another 20 minutes for questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you also for stressing the importance of partnerships. This is also what we try to embed into our curriculum and to give this, this knowledge about the importance of different stakeholders and different partners in this peace process. So thank you once again for the speech. As Mr. Bużański has to leave a little bit earlier, and I know that Dr. Coetzer wanted to make also a comment on partnerships. If you allow me, I will first give the floor to Dr. Coetzer, and then we will go back to the questions by our participants. Please, Dr. Coetzer, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maniszewska. I just want to say to Marcin, wow, what energy, what insights. But I just want to relate to something very, very personal that you said that relates to what you said, skills, attitudes, and values. At the end of 1999, I was based in Afghanistan, and it was one of the worst chapters in the history of that country and the Afghan people. And there was an Air India passenger plane that was hijacked in Nepal. And as they were entering into Pakistan airspace, the plane was hijacked. Cut a long story short, this passenger plane landed in Kandahar in Afghanistan. And we had this crisis on our hands. We had 183 civilians whose lives had to be saved. And I was the spokesperson of the International Committee of the Red Cross at that time. And I got my marching orders to go to Kandahar and to sit down with the Taliban commanders and representatives of the Indian government and the Pakistani government to now negotiate. And exactly for those very points that Marcin mentioned about how important it is that you understand the local context, the local practices, the social factors, the environment, the institutional context, who are the different parties, belligerents to a conflict. You need to be able to have the credibility to speak to all of them. And it starts by having a respect for the view. You may not agree with it, but you need to engage. And cut a long story short, we were able to find a solution. And if you were to say to me today, you know, what was that one element that allowed me to make sure that we brought this to a successful outcome? And I will say to you, it was, I learned how to drink tea, and not 1 cup or 2 cups or 3 cups, but how important in the Afghan culture, having a cup of tea, and how you would, the first cup, you are a foreigner that's lost. The second cup, you are now adopted as a friend. The third one, you're almost now a member of the family, and you will move closer to the person that has the influence and the power. And those skill sets that you spoke about, it's of fundamental importance, ladies and gentlemen, as we live in this world that is interconnected, multi-complex. So again, I would really invite you to say, seriously consider this program, because it has a lot of tangible value. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, this webinar today also gives us the opportunity, us and our participants, to meet online, but meet really those people who will be teaching in the program, whom you will meet on a weekly basis during the courses. So thank you very much, Jon-Hans, for the comment, and thank you to all our speakers. If you allow me now, because we have a couple of questions from the participants themselves, so I would like to start with the first question. The question is about your opinion, not to a specific panelist. So how is COVID, the current pandemic, impacting peace building? What do you think? Who would like to make the attempt to answer this question? It's
I can try. I can.
One wants to speak.
So sorry. So I feel that, you know, there are two sides of it. So on the one hand, you see that because of COVID, because of the pandemic, majority of money and attention goes to the pandemic. So it's much harder to, for example, encourage countries to give some money for the projects that they were giving money in the past. For example, there is, I don't know, an extreme hunger in Yemen. And, you know, the situation is horrible, but because of the fact that all the governments are concerned with the pandemic and COVID, there isn't enough money for the other projects connected to different organizations and problems. So that's definitely a huge disadvantage of it. But on the other hand, and that's from my own experience, and probably that's connected to what Marcin and Jon-Hans were saying about partnerships and also connections. I have never had so many meetings with colleagues like during the pandemic. I have never had so many interesting discussions. I have never met so many people from the field. Many people were stuck at home, and that's why it was easier to connect. But also because of the pandemic, we felt that we had to work together. So the pandemic also helped us to realize how important it is to have partnerships, connections, and that we cannot do it alone. That we have to work together if we want to, you know, make positive changes. So, you know, two sides of a coin, definitely disadvantages, but also advantages because we realized and we connected more. And that's definitely a huge advantage. I hope that we will continue.
Thank you very much. Jon-Hans, please.
Just to build on what Katarzyna would say, I would say the failure of the Westphalian state system in how they engage in peace building processes has been laid bare. What does that mean? Prior to COVID-19, we have seen that so many members of society, vulnerable communities, fell through a minimum safety net. And this is why we have seen international humanitarian and development agencies need to reform. It is not about constantly having to import solutions, work for solutions with the communities in partnership, and use a bottom-up approach. There is such a wealth and richness in indigenous knowledge that the international community continues to trample on and to ignore. Secondly, we keep on talking about the power of technology and how that can help to move huge swathes of community forward. And yeah, I just want to again quote Winston Churchill when he said, let's not look at a crisis only for the problems that it brings, but let's also look at the opportunities that it gives. And this is again where I would like to say, let's look at how we can use indigenous knowledge, partnerships with local communities so that we can work towards lasting peaceful solutions by working bottom up rather than the constant top-down approaches. And the fundamental question at the heart is, let's not be afraid of our differences. Let's celebrate our differences, because my goodness, this tapestry of humanity is so rich. If we can just tap into all those elements that makes us so unique as a species. And also, I think education and pedagogy has a fundamental responsibility to transfer so many of these into a pedagogy of hope and discourse and reflection, rather than this cultural or ideological divide that is so often embedded in our systems. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we all here agree that this diversity brings the added value, and we can see that also in our classrooms. At our university, we actually have students from almost 70 different countries of the world, and we can really see how valuable this peer teaching is. And those different perspectives, backgrounds, and experiences, how this contributes to the teaching and learning process. And I guess that's my experience, but I think it will be shared by my colleagues, the lecturers, that we also learn a lot from our students. Now I have a question specifically to Catherine. Catherine, Anna Paula asks, how can we make governments invest more on education, on gender issues and peace? Education is freedom, empowerment. Is that a threat for governments in general? What do you think?
It's a really, really good question. Thank you. And I think my answer would be to point to the times that we're living in. We only need to look around us and see the kind of the response and the way that the pandemic has and is being handled. And we can recognize that it is not and could never have been a gender neutral crisis, because we don't live in a gender neutral society. And I think governments needing to recognize that and invest, as you say, more on education on gender issues and peace. It's become more apparent than ever. We can't ignore it anymore. And we've seen that the pandemic has disproportionately affected women. We're kind of all living now in a state of crisis. We are. So peace in the traditional sense of the word doesn't exist for anyone, and women have been disproportionately affected. And why? Because of existing gender inequalities. That there is no other reason. And so governments absolutely have to be looking at this and redressing this and undoing the damage that has been done, because we've seen a report, suggested decades of progress on women's rights and gender equality have been undone by this pandemic. So governments, for the first time, perhaps are being forced to recognize this and recognize that women need to be at the heart of the recovery effort as we begin to build back from the pandemic and at every step of the process moving forward. But the same applies in any crisis situation, not just speaking about COVID, but it seems it's almost pointless not to, given that it's what we're living in. And we have to keep looking at where are the women? I think governments can't ignore that anymore. They need to shift their perspective and their thinking. They need to go put policy and programming and make sure that women's leadership is at the heart of all of their efforts. And I think also just a quick note on education itself, and particularly girls' education. I think that has to be more transformative than just getting girls into school. That's not enough. It has to be about ensuring that girls can learn and feel safe whilst they're in school and are able to complete all levels of education, which would give them the skills they need to compete in the labour market. And it's about all of these things, more than just making sure that girls complete a couple of years of education. I was speaking on a panel about this with the World Humanitarian Forum only last month. And I think recognising girls' education as a strategic development priority is also something that has to be acknowledged. Is that a threat for governments? For some, yes. Knowledge is power, isn't it? And when we start to become empowered, who knows what we might do with that? So I think that needs to be acknowledged, yes. But certainly we can't move forwards without recognising that we have to have this at the heart of any recovery effort.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the answer. I totally agree with you. And the next question taps a little bit on the same issue, but from a different perspective. And I think this question will go to Katarzyna, because it's about our country, about Poland. In the recent months, the New York Times and New Yorker have run articles on peaceful protests of the women's movement in Poland. Does the movement go beyond the demand for reproductive rights, and if so, in what ways?
It's an excellent question and an excellent topic, and I'm very happy that we have this question. First of all, as you probably know, we have an excellent history in terms of nonviolent resistance. So Polish Solidarity movement, that was one of the biggest, the most successful nonviolent movements in the world. And people changed the regime, the communist regime in Poland, using just nonviolent means. So what was happening, you can say that Polish people realized that power again, that they realized that the power belongs to us. And this is people's power that is making changes around the world. And in terms of these specific protests, I remember there was one picture, and it was a great picture because it talks about the protests in many ways. There was, as we realized, I think a few days later, a young father with his small daughter. I'm not sure if she was 2 or 3 years old. And they were walking together, and he had a sign, "You will never walk alone." So the protests were not only about women protesting. It was also, people, both, all the genders, realizing that, the power is here and we have to be in this together, and we are in this together. If one group, if we are violating rights of one group, it's not just, that we are violating the rights of one group. This is the violation that concerns us all. So it's not only about women, it's not only about men, it's not about gender, it's about human rights, and we are all humans. So that was the realization that we are in this together. And it was not just at the beginning, it was mainly about the reproductive rights, but after that, it was about human rights in general. It was about the rights of all humans, that we should have, equal opportunities. And if we discriminate one group, there is a chance that in the future, someone will discriminate us. So it was also this feeling, we have to unite, we have to stand together, even if it means, protesting against the government. And I think, that's something that we see in different parts of the world. In Poland, in the US with Black Lives Matter, in Belarus, in Russia, in different countries, when people are saying no to the policies, are saying no to the state's approach. And as we know from research in peace and conflict studies, and this is something that we know from the field, that nonviolent resistance is twice as effective as violent resistance in, for example, the regime change. So sometimes we feel if you want to make changes, you have to use violence because this is, stronger. No, like the research shows, non-violence is twice as effective. Moreover, if you succeed using non-violent means, then there is like a likelihood that your democracy will be stronger than in countries where people were fighting using violent means. And there is a chance that you will not have a civil war in the next 10 years if you compare it to the violent movements. So I do believe that people now, that this is this moment when people realize again, because we had such waves in the 20th century, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, when people were protesting. And now we have a second wave of people's movement, when people are getting the power, when people are feeling, I make decisions and it's not only up to the government, it's up to me. And this is what peace building is about, that we do it together. When I said that everyone can be a peace builder, it wasn't just a phrase. We all should be peace builders in everything we do, because only in that way, only when we realize that, when we take responsibility, we can make positive changes. So great question, and I'm really happy that I can observe that people are protesting using nonviolent means, that they are saying, you can use violence, but we will not, but we will win, also because of the fact that you are using violence. So thanks for the question about Poland.
Thank you very much. And Catherine, please, you wanted to make a comment as well.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I just really quickly wanted to just agree and say that any movement such as this, that seems as though it's about one thing, for example, reproductive rights, for example, racial justice, is always about so much more. And I was thinking, I read a Human Rights Watch article, I think, about the women's movement in Poland, and it was talking about how we're really dealing with fundamental rights here. This isn't about reproductive rights. I love that image of the father and daughter. And it comes down to the rule of law, it comes down to judiciary independence, it comes down to what actually matters to us as human beings. And if we lose these things, then we lose everything. And I think in particular what we're talking about in Poland, it's about all women, and it's about rights to health and freedom from cruel and inhumane treatment and bodily autonomy and privacy. And all of these things also apply to George Floyd. They apply to everyone who is peacefully going about their business and is for whatever reason having that violated. And I think to recognize these things as being more than just reproductive rights or racial justice is essential, and that's how we can move forward with them. So I just really wanted to agree and say what a fantastic question.
Thank you very much. And Jon-Hans, please.
Allow me also to relate it back to our own individual values. As Katarzyna was saying, how in Poland, how each individual voice who decided to embrace non-violent protests. But let me break it down a little bit into each one of our contexts and just ask you, if I may ask you, think of your own perception, your own appreciation of sexual minorities, individuals who have a different sexual identity to that of the majority. How peaceful, how tolerant, how inclusive are we? Or are we judging? Are we, because in reality, that is how we not unknowingly become part of what finally then escalates, and you have a victim and you have a second and a third, and that is how victim starts, where we very often are blinded by our own prejudices. And this is where what Katarzyna and Catherine was saying is so important. Let's not look at the bigger picture. We can be that change that we want to see in the world. And that homework and that action and those values starts with us as individuals. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this comment as well. We still have 2 more questions and 5 minutes left. So let me please ask the next question. I just need to find the question in the chat quickly. I remember the question was from India, from one of our guests who joined us from India. And the question is, youth is the most important asset of every country. So is there any idea how to engage youth to develop peacekeeping approach? Who would like to? Well, I think that our joint program is one of the ideas, but we do have also, I think, other initiatives and ideas. Also at Collegium Civitas, maybe Katarzyna, could you say a few words on?
Sure, but I think Jon-Hans was
yes, I'm sorry, I haven't noticed.
So.
Sorry for that. Jon-Hans, please.
We cannot miss this opportunity to extend a warm welcome to all the citizens of India, and to say, you know, we stand with you as you are going and you confronting a very difficult COVID situation. I just wanted to say that on behalf of both our institutions. I just think if we look at the specific role that the youth is playing in ensuring economic independence of families, and how you are, in terms of micro technology, how you are leading in the world in taking that that element into the next level. I think economic independence is fundamental, because if people still at the end of the day go to bed hungry, people are not able to look after their children, they can't look after their families, and those fundamental human values that exist within a society. And for me, you are the Indian youth, in the way that you've embraced this responsibility. I can only say that I only see the positives, and to urge you to continue to invest in your communities, in your societies, and to contribute in these different economic structures, because that is how you are going to continuously advance your community by creating this economic independence, but more importantly also to ensure that there is a better understanding based on the differences of the rich cultural diversity that exists in India, and that we can have fundamental respect for the others' fundamental values, because human rights, ladies and gentlemen, is the fundamental issue. But of course, with human rights does come more individual freedoms, and we as individuals, as I was saying before, we may not approve of what somebody else sees as their human rights. So let's make sure that we are also truthful, and that we don't contribute to some of this distrust and pressures that eventually explodes into societal violence. Thank you.
So I will just, quick comment. Well, you cannot have peace without including young people. That's just, impossible. When you look at demography in many countries, excluding youth, young people, it means excluding half of the society. Think about, very young societies. And we are advocating for more inclusion and for including women, but also other groups. Because when you're thinking about, situation in a post-conflict countries, when you're thinking about peace strategies, and when you're doing it just, with the people with years of experience, well, it can be nice, but you are missing people that will be living in the future you're trying to shape now. So what you can do, and many organizations, including the UN, are doing that. So there are forums and groups for young people. Young people are included in the process of preparing even important strategies. NATO is doing the same thing. So when NATO is now working on the future strategy, young people are welcomed and invited to be part of the process of thinking about what future we want to see. So I was one of the editors of the White Book on National Security in Poland, and I can say that if I have a chance, if I had a chance to do it again, I wouldn't do it without young people. We didn't do it, and that was a mistake. But you know, you have to learn from your mistakes as well. It was a wonderful work. We included different groups, NGOs, etc., but we didn't include young people. And I know that that was a mistake, but the mistake that I will never make again. Because when you're thinking about the future, when you're thinking about, you know, the strategy for the next year, you have to work with people that will be living in 10 years and that will be active in 10 years. And the more people feel responsible and engaged, then they will be even ready if it's hard at the beginning to make some changes, because they feel, yeah, it's hard, but you know, we have agreed to do that. So the more people you engage, the more people feel responsible for the work. And even if it's hard at the beginning, it's easier to deal with hard times because you know that you are a part of it. I was a part of it. I participated. I created that. So, and that's a wonderful feeling when you know that you are shaping your reality.
Thank you very much. I couldn't agree more actually with, well, both of you. We have still one more question, and this is a very interesting question, I think, and it's also very good to conclude our panel discussion. So if you both, our dear panelists, agree to stay with us a few more minutes, I will just read the question. Please nod if you agree. Okay, you're agreeing, perfect. So the question comes from Julia. Let's say top three arguments, which top three arguments would you use to assure an ordinary citizen, probably influenced by propaganda or just those who are not into politics and peace studies, that peace is more advantageous than the conflict is? Top three arguments. Why is peace more advantageous than conflict?
Respect, humanity, respect, 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 respect. If you ask any individual that has lived during a war or an acute conflict, it strips the individual of any sense of dignity, any sense of identity, and you have simply no idea of your tomorrow. And if you are stripped bare, that level of vulnerability is exceptionally, excruciatingly difficult. I just want to share with you an example. When I worked during the war in the former Yugoslavia, the women in Sarajevo, in Maršalatita Street, which is the main road, whenever they used to go do shopping, when the market was open and they could go and buy food or go and stand in line for food, they always dressed up beautifully. And I could not help once, and I asked one of these ladies, and I said, why do you dress up to go to the street where we know you stand a very real chance to be killed? And she said, because when they're going to pick me up, I want to at least know that I am not just an object, that I would still be a human being and a person that they will recover and that they would know who I was. And that is why I get very emotional about this, because, ladies and gentlemen, humanity is the most important gift that we have. And war and conflicts just destroys that. And it's not just that a war's over and then, we turn the page. Not at all. the effects and the damage is lasting many, many, many years, that it will go on and it rapes you from your dignity as a human being. So peace, dignity, peace, peace, peace. Thank you.
I would add some data, because data shows which gives you like more chances in the future, and which one leads to democracy in the future. But after what Jon-Hans said, I would just, conclude with one sentence that I think influenced me the most, my work, both my personal and professional life. We can talk, about interests, politics, etc. Do the conflict analysis and read a lot, talk a lot, analyze a lot. But the one sentence is, what really matters is people. And if we have that in mind when we're working, when we're talking, when we are with other people, maybe it's not enough, but that's a good beginning. That's a good beginning when we know that what really matters is people, nothing else, people.
Thank you very much, and I think that's a good conclusion for our discussion today. Thank you so much, dear participants. You have the email addresses to all of us. If you need to and want to learn more, reach out. Please don't hesitate to get in touch. Also, here in the chat, my colleague, Ms. Kowalewska, has just posted also the links to our website with all the information about enrollment to Strategic Peace and Conflict Studies Master's Degree Program at Collegium Civitas in cooperation with UNITAR. And last but definitely not least, thank you so much, dear panelists.